Hello, it's Alex, the Bookubus. Today I'm going to be talking about all of the books I read in June. I read 8 books in total, and yeah, I'll say that it wasn't the best month. That's not to say it was a bad month, but I only had one 4-star read and the rest were I rated below that. That's not to say I didn't still enjoy a bunch of these books, but none of them really kind of hit some very high highs, unfortunately, but you know, it was still a decent month. So anyway, enough of the preamble. First up, I read Notice by Heather Lewis, and this is a book that I first heard about from Blackacre Doe. I'll leave a link to his channel in case you aren't already following him. You should definitely go check him out. And he was part of a collaboration video a while ago with Juan from Plagued by Visions, where everyone, well, recommended a disturbing book, and Notice was the one that he talked about. And the premise really intrigued me, and I had to track a copy down. Copies online are really expensive, and I had to be very patient, but finally I found one that I felt I could afford and I jumped on it. So this is about a young woman who begins to work as a sex worker, and she generally meets guys around this one particular bar, and on one occasion she meets this man who takes her back to his home, and there's this kind of three-way situation between our main character, this man and his wife. And yeah, definitely some disturbing sexual content and violence, and the whole backstory behind this as well is very messed up. I won't go into details here. It was definitely uncomfortable to read at times. It goes to some very dark places, and yeah, that's just kind of the beginning of the story really, but it is really a character study of this young woman and what, you know, drove her to do this kind of thing, and what keeps drawing her back to doing that, even though she ends up in some very dangerous situations. And yeah, there are some other characters that come into the story, but yeah, I won't spoil like where it goes. But yeah, this one was, yeah, definitely fit the bill for disturbing, but it was also, I just found it very sad as well. It felt very bleak and hopeless at times, and I really felt for this character and the things that she was going through. Not that I've been in a similar situation, but I've definitely had periods of my life where, yeah, you feel desperate and hopeless, and you maybe, whether consciously or subconsciously, end up, you know, going through some like reckless, self-destructive behaviour. And yeah, so I did relate to this character in some ways, and yeah, not a fun experience really, but yeah, I thought this was such a powerful book. And the author actually died when she was, I believe, 40, by suicide. I think she pulled from some of her own experiences to write this novel. So yeah, that just added like a whole other level of gut punch to the reading experience. Yeah, definitely pretty bleak and depressing, but quite a unique read as well. I don't think I've read anything quite like it, and I would be very curious to read some of her other work. I think she had 2 other books published, and there were just a couple of passages I wanted to read that really stuck with me. So the first one is, "That's the thing you've probably always wanted, someone's undivided attention, and you've wanted it so much and for so long that the form it takes no longer matters." And another line here says, "I didn't know which thing was breaking me, only knew I was broken." So yeah, this is definitely a hard book to recommend because the content of it really isn't going to be something everyone would want to read. But for those, yeah, that are intrigued by it, then I definitely do recommend it. I rated it 4 stars. I thought it was excellent, very powerful. But yeah, like I say, it is a hard one to track down. Moving on to something quite different. I then read My Heart is a Chainsaw by Stephen Graham Jones, and this was a buddy read with my friend Emily. And yeah, mostly had a good time with this. So I've been curious to read this, but it hadn't really been on the top of my list, but she recommended it as a buddy read and I was like, yeah, why not? That's a great opportunity to pick it up. And I'm glad I did. So this is about a teenage girl called Jade. She lives in a small town and she has some personal demons, and yeah, the way that she deals with that is through horror film. And the small town where she lives, there is a wealthy group of people that are coming in to develop a certain area across the lake, and yeah, that kind of like brings about some changes. And basically Jade starts to think that a slasher film scenario is happening around her. So like I say, I mostly did really enjoy this one. I will admit it took me a minute to get into, but once I did, and once I kind of found my stride with it and got into Jade's voice, I really did like it a lot. I think Jade was definitely the strongest point of this book for me. I thought she was just such a great character. Yeah, a complex character. She was really well written. I could relate to her in certain ways. And I just really, really enjoyed hearing her voice. So that was like probably the biggest positive for me. I think the story was a bit more of a mixed bag. A lot of it I did really enjoy, but I did have some issues with it. And some of these were kind of like really big things. Some of them were little things. And yeah, I figured, I know a lot of people have read this, so I was going to do a little spoiler section. So if you have not read it and you don't want to be spoiled, then skip ahead to when it no longer says spoilers on the screen. But a couple of smaller things that didn't really work for me was the setting, like the time period this was set. I was really confused as to when this was supposed to be set. It just, nothing really kind of made enough sense for me to pinpoint it. And later on in the story, we learned that I think it was 2015, if I'm remembering correctly, somewhere around there. And yeah, even once I knew the year, things just still didn't quite feel right. And the author included an afterword, and it seems that he had written this book over a number of years, so that might have contributed to this kind of uncertain time period. But yeah, it was just something that kept taking me out of the story because I just couldn't get a handle on things. Yeah, might not be something that that would bother everyone, but it just kind of irked me at times. And then another point, kind of somewhat similar to that, was the fact that Jade seemed to have quite an extensive horror VHS collection. And I don't know how she acquired this VHS collection. I wish there had been a bit more about that, because that was just, again, something that didn't make sense to me and didn't feel believable, because she wouldn't have necessarily even grown up with VHS because of the time period, because they were already on their way out when she was born and DVDs came in. And VHS are like very collectible. There are definitely some horror VHS which are, you know, hundreds of dollars. And considering the description of her situation, she wouldn't be able to afford that kind of thing. So again, it was just something that kept taking me out of the story, that didn't feel believable. And I'm assuming that it's maybe the author is kind of pulling from his own experience with horror, which would make more sense because of the access to VHS back in the day. But yeah, it just didn't quite ring true for a time setting that was more recent. And yeah, also the fact that she supposedly found like a VHS copy of A Bay of Blood in some random gas station in the 2000s. I was just like, really? Like, I don't think so. How would that happen? I just couldn't see that happening. So yeah, I know these are like probably really nitpicky things to mention, but they just kept bugging me. So anyway, and then there were two kind of bigger things. One was Theo Mondragon. Like, was that just a huge plot hole, or did I miss something? Because yeah, that whole thread did not get wrapped up in any way, and it felt like such a big one. I know there is a sequel coming out, so maybe that thread will be picked up then and explained a bit better, but it felt like just such a big part of the story to not have it a bit more clarified and wrapped up in this installment. Because yeah, I was just left wondering what on earth was that all about. Like, so did he kill those people or what? It didn't make any sense. And then another thing is the villain of the story, the Lake Witch. It just didn't work for me. I just couldn't get on board with the whole Lake Witch thing, like being the actual killer. It just, I don't know, just didn't jive with me, but that's just personal preference, I guess. But the big thing about the Lake Witch being the villain that didn't work for me, and I actually have a slasher-based theory for why this is. So I feel like there are two main types of slasher films. One is a supernatural villain and one is a non-supernatural villain. And the thing with supernatural villains like Freddy Krueger, Jason Voorhees, we know who the killer is. You know, we know what they're capable of, and that's why they're scary. And we get to see those kills throughout the film, and we get to see our protagonist try and survive. And then the non-supernatural type of slasher film is when we don't know who the killer is. So yeah, we'll still see the kills throughout the film, but we won't know who the villain is. And the reason that they're scary is because of that not knowing, and we therefore have a bunch of suspects, and yeah, we have to see if that can be figured out before it's too late and the protagonist also gets killed. But the thing with My Heart is a Chainsaw is they went the route of having an unknown killer and a bunch of suspects, but then the killer was revealed to be supernatural. And so it just felt like it was a mix of the two that didn't work, at least for me. So then it got me thinking, well, maybe the author was intentionally trying to play with those tropes, but I don't think that was the case, because we get a lot of slasher talk throughout the book, and you would think that that would be touched on if it was like a relevant point, and it wasn't. So I don't know, that was just another thing that it just didn't work for me, and I think it was a really big thing to not have work. But yeah, maybe it didn't bother anyone else. I don't know, you'll have to let me know. Okay, so spoilers are over. So yeah, despite those things, I know I probably went on and on about them, but there were kind of big things that detracted from the book for me. Overall, I did still really enjoy it. It did have a lot of positives. I loved the slasher talk, I loved Jade, and yeah, the story and the other characters definitely had their moments too that I enjoyed. So I rated this one 3.5 stars. I'm not sure I'm too fussed about reading a sequel, but we'll see. I'm not ruling it out. And yeah, I will say that if you've never seen any slasher films, I wouldn't recommend picking this book up. I think you need to have like a basic grasp of that subgenre to get the book, because there's a lot of slasher talk. You know, there are certain films that will get spoiled for you if you haven't seen them. There are certain films that, you know, are referenced a bunch of times throughout the book, so if you don't know what they're talking about, I feel that would be confusing. But yeah, anyway, so those are my thoughts on My Heart is a Chainsaw by Stephen Graham Jones. Do let me know if you've read this one and what you thought, because yeah, I'm really curious. Next up, I read Bethanys Sin by Robert R. McCammon, and this was June's pick for Kelly's book club. That's Kelly Hooked on Books. I will leave a link to her channel as well. And it's about a couple and their young daughter who move to this small town called Bethanys Sin. They're kind of trying to start a new life for themselves in a better location and have a better quality of life. And everyone in the village seems really nice and welcoming, and it's a beautiful place. And yeah, things are looking up for them, but are they really? Of course, there are some strange goings on in this village, and yeah, they get caught up in them. So this one was also a bit of a mixed bag for me, another one that I rated 3.5 stars. It had some parts that I thoroughly enjoyed, and then it had some other parts that didn't really work for me. So this one starts off with 2 like really excellent chapters. The first one is about an archaeological dig and the finds that are uncovered. It was really great. And then the second one is set in Vietnam, and we're following our main character who is a prisoner of war, and yeah, some of the things that he went through there. Again, a really excellent chapter. Then after that we pick up with our main character some years later, and he and his family are moving into Bethanys Sin. So the story at that point takes on a bit more of a slower pace, and yeah, we really get to know the characters and the situation and the other people in the village. And yeah, we have scenes of some strange things happening. There are these people on horses that seem to ride through the village at night, and occasionally people might get killed and disappeared. And of course our main character starts to get suspicious about things that are going on, and yeah, he starts doing a bit of digging, and of course, yeah, digs a bit too far. So yeah, I thought this one had a couple of really great scenes in there, but it did kind of lose its momentum, I think, by the end. It's hard to say too much more about this one without giving some major spoilers to the plot, but it did feel, I don't know, just a bit kind of eye roll worthy of like just where the story went, and it didn't quite live up to some of the strengths that had come through earlier in the story. It was still a good read. Like I said, I gave it 3.5 stars. I'm still glad I read it. I do think this is one of the author's earlier works, which he since kind of somewhat disowned. Like, I don't think he thinks of them, his first few novels, as like his best work. And the only 2 books of his that I've read so far are from that period. So that was, yeah, Bethanys Sin and They Thirst. And they were both good, just not quite like great. So yeah, I definitely need to read some of his later stuff that he, yeah, personally thinks is better. So I look forward to that. Next up, I read a new release. This was Anybody Home by Michael J. Seidlinger. And this, I believe, comes out in August, and I was sent an advance copy by the publisher. And yeah, I don't do that very often. I'm just not that kind of reviewer, that type of reviewer, you know, I just like to read what I want to read. But yeah, occasionally someone will get in touch and the book will sound really interesting. So that was what happened in this case, and I accepted. But sadly, I didn't really enjoy this one. So this is a home invasion story. It's been compared to Funny Games, which is like pinnacle of home invasion horror. And yeah, this is following a group of people who break into someone's home and terrorise the family that lives there. And it also has commentary on like people watching this as entertainment. And so yeah, definitely pulls a lot from Funny Games and the themes of that. And yeah, I mean, it's awkward to have to give a not good review of a book I was sent. You know, obviously it's nothing personal against the author, and you know, I really do hate to piss on anyone's bonfire. You know, it's not what I want to do, but I did still feel I should give my honest thoughts. And yeah, I think this one did have some interesting ideas, but I just don't think the execution really worked. I found it to be very slow, and I've seen people describe this as like really tense and disturbing and frightening, and I didn't even feel like it had any tension, let alone anything more than that. There was no like sense of dread. It just felt very bland, you know, it didn't do anything for me, quite honestly. So yeah, I don't know if I have a ton more to say about it. I did look at other reviews once I'd finished it, and it seems like a lot of people had a great time with it and thought it was brilliant. So to each their own. Obviously, if this still sounds interesting to you, you might want to give it a go. But yeah, sadly, I found this one a bit of a slog to get through because it just never really engaged me. And yeah, ultimately didn't do anything for me. So I rated it 2.5 stars. And then the rest of the month, I just read some vintage YA and middle grade. I had my scary sleepover weekend in the last weekend of June. And yeah, in between finishing the previous book and Scary Sleepover weekend starting, I had a bit of time to squeeze like a short book in. So I decided to pick one of the Twilight series, and it was Nightmare Lake by Carol Laymon, which is a pen name for Richard Laymon. And yeah, I was really curious to see how he handled a YA book, and pretty well. So this is about a brother and sister and their parents who have travelled away for a holiday near this lake, and one day the brother and sister are out on a boat with their dog as pictured on the cover, and they end up going onto this little island and they find a skeleton. And yeah, after that things get a bit crazy, and I didn't notice it going into the book, but there is a very big clue on the cover as to what subgenre of horror this goes into, but I guess I won't spoil it in case you're like me and you just didn't notice. But thankfully it's a subgenre that I really enjoy, so that was fine with me. And yeah, this was just a fun little read. I thought the story was well paced and the characters were well done. We're mostly following the teenage boy, and yeah, there are various other characters involved. There's like a kind of hillbilly backwoods character that lives out in the woods, and then there's, I think, the local sheriff, and yeah, all of your kind of typical small town characters, I guess. But yeah, it was just a really fun read, and I do think the ending kind of lost it a little bit, unfortunately, but yeah, it was still a good one. I'm glad I read it. I gave it 3.5 stars. And then moving on to the books I read for Scary Sleepover weekend, and I did just recently put up a vlog for my weekend, so if you haven't seen that and you would like to, then I will leave a link to it. First up, I read a Goosebumps book. This was Welcome to Camp Nightmare by R.L. Stine. And this is about a young boy who goes away to this summer camp. He's going away from home and everything's, you know, a bit unfamiliar. But yeah, not only that, but there's some weird things going on at this camp, and there are strange noises in the night. This was a pretty good one. I quite enjoyed it. It was a quick read, a fun one, you know, exactly what I wanted. Yeah, this one kind of went in an interesting direction at the end that I wasn't expecting. I'm not sure it quite worked, but I think as a kid it might have been a bit more enjoyable, whereas reading it as an adult it just kind of felt like what. But anyway, yeah, I know I'm not the intended audience for them, so like I said, it was still a fun read and I gave it 3 stars. Then I read a point horror book. This was The Stalker by Carol Ellis, and this is about a teenage girl who is part of a production of Grease the musical, and they are travelling around various towns to, you know, perform their show. She is a dancer, and it seems that she has an obsessed fan out there who is like sending her roses, but also kind of threatening messages that like you will be mine kind of style things. And as the story goes on, things progress and get more dangerous, and there are a bunch of different suspects along the way, and there's some romance, of course. And yeah, this was a good one. I enjoyed it. It had a good climax with an action scene, and yeah, the villain reveal was good, and yeah, it was just a good time. So I rated this one 3.5 stars. And then last up, I read Summer Lightning by Wendy Corsi Staub, and this was about another teenage girl. She receives a computer for her 17th birthday, and she starts to receive these strange messages on it, which are from this guy who turns out to be dead. So she's been communicating with a ghost, and she does have a boyfriend who she loves very much, but she's, yeah, strangely attracted to this ghost guy and tries to find out who he is and what happened to him. And all the while she is kind of growing further and further apart from her boyfriend. And this one was okay. It started off really well. I really liked the setup at the beginning, and I enjoyed her writing style, and you know, the characters were all believable. I think it did just get a bit kind of slow and repetitive throughout, like a chunk of it, but it did pick up again at the end. It had kind of an interesting development in the storyline, obviously related to the ghost guy, and yeah, I thought it ended pretty well. So yeah, this one was okay. I gave it 3 stars. So that was everything I read in June. Do let me know if you've read any of these. I would love to hear your thoughts, or let me know what you've been reading recently, if there are any things you would recommend. Thank you ever so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and hopefully I will see you again in my next video. Bye!